All right. Good afternoon, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. Uh, you may know that the Natural History Museum of Utah, recently opened a special exhibition coming to us through the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. This is an amazing special exhibition that will be here with us until September 15th. It's called Microsculpture, Insect Portraits by Levon Biss. This is a really fantastic exhibition all about super high resolution macro photography of insects, showing the diversity and beauty of the structures and the anatomy of these amazing creatures. And we're thrilled today to have a conversation with the mind behind the this exhibit, Mr. Levon Biss. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, my fellow panelists, and Levon. First of all, Christy Bills is the museum's invertebrates collections manager, which includes duties to maintain and grow our insect or entomology collections. And Mr. Levon Biss, who is again the artistic genius behind this amazing exhibition. So Christy and Levon, if you can turn on your cameras. Wonderful. Great to see you all. Thank you so much for being here. Levon, thanks for joining us. It's really a great thing to have you with us.
It's a pleasure, and I'm grateful for you, sharing the exhibition in Utah. I wish I could be there. It's a little bit of a ways for me,
Indeed.
but yeah, I hope all your visitors and patrons enjoyed the show.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here. And I should mention that Levon's currently in the UK, so he's joining us from across the pond, as they say.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a little bit sleepy at the moment, so I got back from Japan yesterday, so I'm about 8 hours ahead of my times, which makes it. I'm not quite sure what time zone I'm on. So if I start talking nonsense, just let me know.
No trouble, no worries. Well, listen, we're so thrilled again to have you with us today, and frankly, having this exhibit at our museum, I think is a dream come true for Christy and myself. I'm the director of the museum here at the Natural History Museum of Utah, but as I mentioned to you earlier, Levon, I'm also an entomologist, and Christy has been working here as invertebrates collection manager and entomologist extraordinaire for many years. And so together, the two of us have a goal to have a hostile takeover of the museum for all things bugs and all things arthropods. So I guess we'd like to just start the conversation by, potentially asking you. I'm very interested in knowing a little bit about your background. I know that you're a photographer of a whole large variety of subjects, including political figures and cultural figures and sports figures and all these kinds of things.
Mhm.
Why bugs?
Why bugs? Well, I've been a photographer now for maybe coming up 30 years, 26, 27, 20. I lose count. But and I think it's important in any creative industry to evolve and keep on moving and keep on trying new things. And so that's why, looking back now in hindsight, I can see that I've sort of changed genre of photography every 5 or 6 years. I started off doing a lot of sort of photo documentary work, and then I went to portraiture, did a lot of sports, did advertising, commercial work, and then that's probably when I started photographing the insects. I was doing a lot of sports advertising work, which was wonderful. You get to meet some incredible people. But I found as I was just shooting kind of the same portraits, same pictures, but with the different athletes in a different part of the world, and I needed a new challenge, and I'd have been thinking about it for a couple of years maybe, and then it actually came around through my son, who was probably about 8 years old at the time. And I was trying to work out what this new project would be, what this new genre of photography that I could embrace would be. And he brought in a small little ground beetle from our backyard, and it's quite a common species. There's nothing particularly unique about it. But the previous Christmas, we bought him as a present a science kit, like a little kiddie's science kit, and it had a microscope in it. So we put this bug under the microscope and to look at it, and it was just a common ground beetle, this insect. And I looked at it through the microscope with him, and I was absolutely mesmerized about how it looked. Because I think if you're an entomologist or or even somebody within the science fields, you're used to looking at things in high magnification and maybe the novelty wears off. But for somebody like myself at the time, it was quite a moving thing to see something that was so utterly beautiful that had been there all this time. And by that time, I was maybe late 30s, early 40s, and I'd never experienced anything like that before. And so the first insect that I photographed was that ground beetle, and it was a kind of a present for my son. Little did I know to actually photograph it properly. It took me a year to work out how to do it. So it was quite an endeavor, but I did it, and that was it. And I got stuck on that kind of high magnification photography and started developing my technique and process and learning from other people. And in the end, I approached the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, which is maybe 45 minutes, an hour away from me, and said, "Look, this is what I'm doing." I showed them some of my test pictures, and they could see the kind of resolution I was starting. And they were fairly crude still in those days, but their reaction told me that I was onto something that was worth pursuing. And bless them, they gave me open access to their entire collection and helped me along the way. So all the insects that you see within microsculpture that you're showing are all from the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, and it's a nice way of celebrating their collection, but also they helped me, uh, allowed me to use proper beautiful insects and some historic insects. We've got Alfred Russel Wallace, some of his specimens in there. You've got some of Charles Darwin's specimens in there. You know, so it allowed me to how should we say, play with proper material. So
That's amazing.
essentially that's how it all started.
That's amazing. And I'll say, and I'll invite Kristen to join us in the conversation as well. But I'll say that now I've been privileged to give several tours of your exhibit here for guests and whatnot.
Mm.
And it really is fascinating the reactions that visitors have when they enter. And it's just as you described, showing people something that they typically don't see and perhaps have never experienced
Mm.
is so powerful to see the reaction of number one, the appreciation of the amazing diversity of insects, but then the intricacies of the microscopic details of them. It really is. It's so fascinating to see people's reactions.
Well, I think the reason that the exhibition works and why it's been successful and it's it's gone down well with the general public is because firstly it's entertaining, yeah, and I think you know when you're providing a visual experience to somebody that they've never had before, they're standing in front of an insect that's printed in a 2D format that's maybe 2 meters, maybe 3 meters high, then you're giving them a visual experience which is unique. And you can look at these insects under microscopes, but I personally, this is my personal opinion, I don't enjoy the process or the experience of looking through a microscope because you've got very shallow depth of field. You can only see one tiny part of the insect, whereas having done all the hard work to be able to produce these like large format prints, you're allowing the viewer to step back, take their time, and study and appreciate that insect in a much more enjoyable, palatable way.
Yeah,
And by doing that, obviously, and I always think that the pictures should not just be seen as pretty pictures. They should. I always look at them as being educational tools primarily, and then artistic pictures secondary. So if you engage with the audience through that visual experience, give them an entertainment, something enjoyable, then you've captured their attention, and then you can start educating and relaying information. They can absorb as much of that information as they want, even if it's a tiny bit. It's more than they walked into the show with.
yeah,
So hopefully the pictures will be say like educational tools rather than just pretty pictures.
absolutely true. Christy, do you want to jump in with a question?
I have so many thoughts. I'm so excited about the exhibit. I completely agree with you, Levon, about microscopes being, it's a skill set. It takes time and it's a very personal experience, but your images are a group experience. You can have a grandmother and a grandchild, you can have a family. And I've done a lot of work in nature education, and I'm concerned about the mental health crisis. And one of the ways to resolve that is for people to spend more time outside. But one of the
Mhm.
reasons they don't, one of the listed reasons is because they're people list bugs. They don't want to be around bugs, which seems crazy to me and Jason
Mhm.
and other people who are attuned to the loveliness of insects. But I love the way that your images can show people how lovely insects are. So I think when people are unfamiliar with something, then they're afraid of it. But when they get
Yeah.
to see it up close and see how beautiful it is, and I hope what your images do is to make people look closer, just like you did when you first started, is look more closely at the bugs just under a rock around them or something flying by or sitting next to them at a picnic table and say, oh, wait, maybe this is lovely. Maybe this is part of the beauty of the world and I can be around it and I'm fine. And I'll just look closer and enjoy it instead of being afraid of it and make it stop me from having experiences I want to
Yeah.
have.
I think you've nailed it perfectly. That's exactly what it is. I think people are scared of what they're of things that are foreign or alien or they're not used to. And I think because insects are small, essentially, we don't have that relationship with them. If it was a mammal, for example, you're very familiar with what a rhino looks like, or a dog, even if you haven't seen one up close, you know what it is. But I think there's something mysterious about insects because they're so small, so abundant, and I think that makes people a little bit wary about them. But if you can get if you can overcome that, I think it's quite important at the moment, particularly with insect decline and biodiversity loss being such a crucial crisis, that you make people aware that these creatures are nothing to be scared of. They're things to be celebrated, and also, if we can make people understand that we as a species require these creatures to survive. We and that's where I go back to about these images being an educational tool. If you can break that barrier of insects being scary, you know, then that's the biggest hurdle. Then if you can get people to appreciate these creatures, then hopefully, they may not mow their lawns quite so much, or they
Mm.
may, do other things to help populate species in their local area. And there's Dr. Dave Grimaldi, who's an entomologist at AMNH that I work with. He put it perfectly: is that you can only care about something if you understand it, and, and I think it's perfectly put. If you can help the public understand insects, understand their purpose and their relationship to us as humans, then hopefully, these images can have a positive sort of impact.
Mhm.
I love the point that you made earlier about the fact that these are primarily or could be used as tools for education.
Mm.
And that's one thing that as I give tours of your exhibit, um, I find stories for almost every image that I can relay and give a little bit of information about either life history or behavior or something like that, and really add that educational hopefully component in that people
Mm.
can listen to or not if as they want. But certainly one of my favorite stories about your exhibit. So I study all of the things that are related to cicadas. So I'm a tree hopper specialist, and you have a couple of tree hoppers
Mhm.
highlighted in the exhibit. Um, One in particular, Cladonota, which is one of my all-time favorite tree hoppers. It's for those of you who haven't seen Cladonota, it's their structures often look like little bits of twig or bark, so that they are camouflaged perfectly on the plants that they feed on. And so I tell that story about how form and function can be so attuned and aligned in such an amazing way. I also tell a story of a runaway selection when we're looking at the stalk-eyed flies, the diopsid flies. What are your favorite stories, or give me an example of your favorite story in your work?
I mean, the beauty about when I started photographing insects, obviously, I'm not an entomologist, I'm not a scientist, and to be honest with you, less now than from when I started this kind of work. I found science intimidating, and I think a lot of people do. General public find science intimidating, um, and it was only through working through with scientists. One of the entomologists, the main entomologist that I worked with on this at Oxford, was Dr. James Hogan, and it was the thing I enjoyed most was when I used to go to Oxford and pick up a new batch of specimens. I'd just pepper him with questions about them, and he used to like fill me with information. Everything he told me was brand new because I was working in a field that was new to me. Even the things, the one that stuck in my head was just simply about color and pigment. I had no idea that, sort of beetles, for example, make their color through like the refraction of light, I believe, as opposed to like maybe butterflies that use pigment. The idea that on a microscopic level, they're spitting the visible, light spectrum to make their color. And in fact, there's now, please excuse me, I don't use the scientific names for these insects again because I'm not a scientist.
Sure.
The orchid cuckoo bee, and I loved this creature so much. I shot it twice for the project. And bear in mind, each picture takes 3 to 4 weeks to make. That's quite an investment. But you will see it's a green bee, and it's got like a metallic exoskeleton, and where I light it from different angles, you can kind of see there's different coloration on it, and that's a good illustration of the way that its microsculpture is refracting the light to create a different appearance. So things like that I found amazing, and James always gave me interesting facts about every specimen that I photographed, and it was good. It was good. It was a fun learning curve.
I'm so glad you actually said that you feel like you're not a scientist or that science feels intimidating, because
Mm.
one of the things that I love about your work and also about entomology is I often call it a people's science, because I feel like because bugs are around us all the time and people have such an emotional reaction to, I either really love butterflies or I really hate spiders. People will tell me, like, I feel like there's a hook and a way to invite people in and say, actually, no, science is for you. You can do science. There's a way to participate. And we run a lot of community or citizen science projects here at the museum. And
Mm.
we love to invite people into the process and say,
Yeah.
we need artists, we need photographers, we need everyday people to help us. And entomology is such a great segue science. Like, please come do science with us. It's for everybody.
Yeah. But that's I think that's where artistic and creative mediums can help break down the barrier of intimidation. So, say with microsculpture, people can go in there and they can just look at beautiful pictures, yeah, and you
Mhm.
can take it at that level. But then there's always the option to go further and trying to understand more about these creatures. And I think if you can provide within science or science exhibits, an entertainment factor. So it's kind of not dry. It's not, um, you know, they can take something away from it that they can relate to in a way that doesn't make them, just because you're not, a degree level scientist and you understand every Latin name and stuff like that. There shouldn't be an issue when you're going to see a science exhibit. You can go to a science exhibit purely on the aesthetics and take something away from that point. So hopefully these pictures they will hopefully make people feel less intimidated by science and and hopefully they'll embrace the insects a bit more.
Yeah, I love that.
Levon, I'd love maybe for some of our audience who are photography buffs,
Mm.
both perhaps amateur and professional. I wonder if you could describe some of the mechanical processes that you use I'm going to share a screen here. I think hopefully you'll be able to see that. Do you see that your image there of the beetle? Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, traditionally, macro photography of insects, as you I think mentioned earlier, the focal length problem is insurmountable. So
Yeah.
how did you get around that? How do you mechanically?
Well, so basically, there's a photographic process called photo stacking. And it's been around for quite a while. And essentially, all I've done, I've taken that process and kind of supersized it to a certain extent. So essentially, what happens with high magnification photography is that the more magnification there is, there's something called a shallow depth of field that comes into play. Now, shallow depth of field, the way I try and explain it to people is if you look out the window, for example, here, I'm looking out there, and you close one eye and you look at a certain point, say between what's in front of you and the distance, a certain point, and you'll notice that everything in the distance is out of focus and everything in the foreground is out of focus. Now, that is a shallow depth of field. And obviously, if you get the same phenomena occurring when you're using a microscope lens. So to get around that and to produce images that are fully focused from front to back and have all this detail, you have to photograph lots of slithers of focus. So what I do is my camera is set up on an electronic rail. It's got a microscope lens on the end of it, and through a piece of computer software, I'll set the focal point, the front focal point of the insects that might be on the elytra of a beetle, and I'll set the furthest focal point away, which might be its legs. So on a regular ground beetle, that might be 6 millimeters, something like that, 5 millimeters. And the camera will move forward. It'll take a photograph, move forward again, take a photograph, move forward again. And so you end up with kind of lots of photos, each with a tiny different slither of focus. Now, the distance between each of those photographs is, if you're shooting on, say, a 10 times magnification objective, the distance between each photograph will be about 7 microns. So if you think 7 microns is the width of a hair on your head is about 75 microns. So you're taking 7 or so shots to get across the width of the hair on your head. So that's kind of the tiny increments that the camera's moving forward. And so going from the front of the beetle to the back, that might give you like 500 or 600 images. Now, then you take some more software and essentially you squash those images down to produce one image that's fully focused from front to back. But the way I do it is I'll photograph the insect in maybe 25 or 30 different sections. So I'll pan across it. So I might just photograph the eye of the beetle, and I'll light that area as beautifully as I can. Kind of treat it like a small still life. And then once I've finished that, then I'll pan across to another section of the beetle and I'll photograph that. And I might change the lighting a bit because, if you think the eye of a beetle, it's opaque, it's slightly shiny, it's concaved. So therefore you use a lighting style that suits that kind of structure. Now, if I was photographing the hair on a leg, I might want to backlight it so you can kind of silhouette that hair and bring out that kind of element. So basically I'll work across the insect like that. And so you end up with maybe 25 different sections that you flatten down. So you have a bit like a jigsaw, so you have 25 different sections that are fully focused from front to back. And then in post-production, you bring those together to produce the final image. So it's very labor intensive. Like I say, some images will be made up of anywhere between 10,000 to 12,000 separate shots. And they can take 3 to 4 weeks each to make. But then you end up with images on a file size, anywhere between maybe 2 gigabytes and maybe up to 5, 6, 7 gigabytes, which allows you then firstly to print very, very big. So you can print images that are 3 by 2 meters. And in fact, you're only really using half the resolution there because we're limited by the physical size of printers that are available. So actually, so for each one of my projects, I always produce a bespoke website where you can view online the full resolution files. So you can zoom into the full resolution file, which is great because it then allows the exhibitions, the images, not to just be localized within physical exhibitions, but they can be used globally. And so I get emails from schools on a weekly basis, like teachers from schools that use the websites in class for whether it's science class, art class, biology, or whatever it is, and they're using them, like I say, as educational tools, and that happens all the time. Because they've got so much detail. So that's kind of how that's the photographic process. There's lots of blood, sweat, and tears, and quite a lot of swearing along the way. But it's worth it. I think it's worth it.
Well, the results are stunning, and what I'm sharing on screen here is you can't even see the amazing resolution in the live insects or the live photos that you have. And in fact, one of the favorite parts of the exhibition is the fact that we have those high resolution photos loaded onto a desktop or a tabletop interactive where people can go and use their hands to kind of expand and really zoom in to various places. And as you say, the resolution is absolutely phenomenal. It's stunning.
It's quite.
This is that. Oh, go ahead.
But no, it's quite funny that the digital aspect, and this is when you're producing a project. I think you've always got to think about the audience, and if with these kind of projects, you want to hit all different levels from an 80-year-old to a 50-year-old to a 30-year-old to a 7-year-old, and so you have to cater for everyone's, where everyone will go. And I had exhibitions before where you've got a room full of like 40 3 by 2 meter prints, yeah. And on the far side of the gallery, you have a small area where there's some iPads with the website on it where you pinch and zoom and have a digital experience. And I guarantee you, any visitor under the age of 10 will just bypass all the giant prints and go straight for the iPad. And you think, and you could take that as going, look, I've produced these pictures that, but at the end of the day, if they're getting that experience in that way, and you're able to reach them and you're able to sort of like connect with them, then it works. And so I think the digital experience works as well as the actual physical prints during the exhibitions.
Can I ask you a question? So you say you weren't a big bug fan before you started this process, but obviously now at this point, you know a lot about insect morphology. Do you ever see anything when you're doing your work that just shocks you or surprises you or makes you gasp?
Oh yeah, all the time. Because and that's one of the pleasing things about this kind of photographic process is that until you start shooting the photograph of the insect, and it might be a week into the actual picture that you're making, you will never really know what you actually photograph. And it's only when you start flattening these images, like I was saying, where you're taking lots of slithers of focus. It's only at the stage when you start flattening those slithers of focus into one image that is fully focused from front to back, you can kind of only then really see what you've got. And then, but there are things, I remember, photographing a tiger beetle, and I was having trouble with the hair. And I realized that the hair on its back, the hairs seem to be hollow. They're a different kind of structure where they're a bit like soft boxes. And so the light was entering the hair and sort of like resonating inside and then sort of glowing almost because of the structure. And so and things like that. Again, I go back to the fact that I'm not an entomologist, that everything is new to me. And the idea that, a single insect can have, multiple different types of variety of hair for different function. There was one, what was it? It was just on a normal blowfly, I think, where I never realized that along the wings they had this, like, we call it, Velcro. Is the same thing over there? Just a small section on their wings have got this loop in hair, which I believe is just like to hold the wings back, is it? When they want. And I think it's exciting to learn things like that. I think it's fascinating, and I just find insects now absolutely mesmerizing. I think they're engineering marvels, and by displaying insects in this kind of size and detail, you can really appreciate that engineering that nature's created, and it's quite inspiring.
one of the I mentioned before that I really enjoy telling stories of evolution using your images as kind of illustrations. One of the stories that I tell is of independent evolution, and you have a beautiful image. Let's see if I can pull it up here. I don't have it called up. Let's see. You have a beautiful image of a mantis fly or mantid fly, and how that's okay. There it is. Figure out what button to push. There it is. Of this guy here, and how those raptorial forelegs are. This is not a praying mantis, even though it looks like a praying mantis, and they're really not very closely related at all phylogenetically. And how two very different organisms, very disparate, distantly related organisms, have arrived at similar function or similar structures based on a function that they're performing. Do you see any other? What are the large scale kind of surprises that you have found through your work?
Well, I just enjoy how we're going back to like design, natural design, and obviously, through evolution, just so how well adapted these creatures are to their environment. Just honing down to survive in that one habitat, which makes them thrive, but obviously also makes them incredibly vulnerable. When those ecosystems start to become unbalanced, and they over millennia have adapted to work in that one perfect system, and that system gets unbalanced. So that's kind of a negative to this way of sort of honing in on working and living in one environment. I think what was it? There was a flying moth that I photographed within Microsculpture, and basically I think it's from one particular island, and the wings have over centuries or millennia have shrunk.
I'm trying to find it.
Do you know the one I mean?
I do. Yeah, it's the flightless moth.
The flightless moth. That's right. Yeah, because it's got no predators. It doesn't need to fly anymore. So obviously,
I can't find it.
If you don't need to fly, we don't need these giant things on your back taking up energy. And so the wings are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's still a moth, but it's got tiny wings that are completely functionless.
Yeah.
And I think that is really nice seeing sort of nature work out what is needed, what's not needed, and going for the most efficient path.
That's great. Christy, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'd feel remiss if I didn't mention that our collection here at the museum has an online database, and we don't have all of our specimens online, but we have about 80,000 specimens, and the database is available to the public. People can access it through our website, and we also do focus stacking of our images. We have about 4,500 images online. We do not take a month per specimen, though, to image them, and they are not the quality. They're not artsy, but they're gorgeous, and I'm really pleased with them. And they also include the data about when and where they were collected, so they can be sorted by date and collector, and people are welcome to access that as well, and it's available through the Natural History Museum website. So we also have images that are focus stacked, but we only take, I think, between like 10 and maybe 30 images to meld together. But yeah.
And incidentally, here's that flightless moth.
Oh yeah. I think it's a strange creature.
Indeed.
But you can see just on the back there, those two tiny little wings that are slowed. And I guess give it another few thousand years, yeah, they'll probably be gone.
Evolution is astounding. Hey, at this point, I'd love to invite anyone watching. If you have questions, feel free to put your questions into the chat of the webinar, and we'll, if we can see them, we'll try to address them as we go. So if you have questions and you'd like to ask Levon something about his work or about the subjects, please throw those questions into the chat, and we'll be looking for those.
Can I ask another question? Has there been any surprising outcomes from this work that you didn't anticipate?
surprising outcomes. But to be honest with you, there was never, I'm surprised about the response it's received from the public. This exhibition's traveled around the world now. So I think I think it must be about 26 to 27 different countries now. And it amazes me, the public response to it. And I think it's made me realize that if you package up a project in the right way, that it can be effective. And I think it's with this kind of subject, obviously, I think given the chance, people like to embrace nature. The idea of nature is a beautiful thing. So if you can provide it to them in a palatable way, then they'll respond to that. So it's made me learn how to create projects for sure, and how to deliver projects, and how when you're starting a project and you're photographing something, to think about how that image will be rolled out to the public, how it's relayed to the public, and I think it's really important. There's no point in me spending 3-4 weeks on a single image if it's only going to be me, my wife, and kids that are ever going to see it.
Yeah.
So, for example, Microsculpture, and it's still going on. It's been touring South America for quite a while, but what we've done down there is it's been shown in like shopping malls, because there isn't a culture of going to museums so much. And I think a lot of the public, do also can feel intimidated by going to museums. Maybe, I'm not sure the percentage of the general public that will go to museums, but if you can open scientific exhibitions to a public that wouldn't necessarily go to an exhibition at a museum, and you take that work to them in the shopping mall, you can reach and engage with a new section of society that you wouldn't have normally. And I think we're on to about our 10th or 11th show across South America now. It's a mobile exhibition that kind of pops up, and it's nice. You're meeting a different demographic, so to speak. So going back to the initial question, I think one of the things I've learned about this whole project is, certainly how you roll out an exhibition, how you can use art to educate, and do that in a fun, enjoyable way.
I love that you're so open to non-conventional ways to show your amazing work. I think that's so great that you want to go to where people are. That's fantastic.
Yeah, but that goes back to the thing about them being educational tools. I don't show in galleries generally. I've got no gallery representation. I don't sell my pictures through galleries, because that's kind of it's not really a world that I want to inhabit too much. I prefer public spaces, public institutions. So all my work, if I'm shooting a new project, I'll try to attach myself with an institution and use that one particular collection, because then it works for everyone. It enables that museum to celebrate their collection. And it gives me a rich source of material to work with, and I can tap into their entomologists for the scientific side of it. So with microsculpture, for example, Dr. James Hogan from Oxford University Museum of Natural History provided all the texts and the scientific element for the project. So it's great for the museum and the institution to add their part as well. So it's a cooperative kind of process.
I think that's awesome.
Levon, we have a question from one of the guests joining us here on the webinar, from Lismo Petey. And Lismo Petey is asking, how does someone get started with macrophotography, and would you recommend Bugs as a good place to start?
I would certainly recommend Bugs as the perfect place to start. They're abundant, they're around you everywhere. And I photograph bugs from museums collections. I'll, because my pictures maybe take 3 weeks, 4 weeks, that bug needs to be still for a long time. So all my insects are deceased, but they're so I don't go out and catch my own specimens and do that. Some of the insects I photograph in this project were collected by Charles Darwin in the 1850s, or Alfred Russel Wallace. It's their historical specimens. But you can certainly get into macro photography using live specimens in your backyard. And there's ways of doing it, and it's hugely rewarding. The equipment itself isn't that expensive. It's as far as you want to take it. You search macro photography online, and there's 1,000,001 forums that you can gain knowledge. That's how I gained all my knowledge, was through scouring forums online for technical help. I find that certainly macro photography, because maybe is not a mainstream type of photography, particularly extreme macro photography, which is once you get into like 5 times life size magnification or 10 times, it's actually I think there's very few of us doing it on a professional level, and so because it's more of an amateur-based thing, I think the amateur groups are hugely generous in the sharing of their knowledge, and it's a wonderful resource. And you can tap into those forums and get all the information you'll ever require. So yeah, I certainly suggest insects as a good starting point.
Thanks for that, and Lismo PD. So definitely try it out, man. That's great. I actually one part of your answer intrigued me, and this is something I've been wondering for a while. As I look at these beautiful images that you produced, how you're in some cases using historical specimens, you're using specimens from the Oxford Museum collection, the Oxford University Museum collection. How did you get around the problem with pins? Like some of these must have been pinned specimens. Yeah. And I know that when I've tried to do macro photography with specimens, you get a dark spot in the middle of the thorax because that's where the top of the pin was out of focus, out of the focal frame. How did you get rid of that?
Well, so with this one, and this is a tricky one, so obviously a lot of them are pinned, but what we do is we cut off the head of the pin. So you don't have that bulbous end, and by getting rid of that, because when you're photographing at such a high resolution, magnification, sorry, the lens can sort of kind of see around certain objects. So it helps out. And the other thing is all the images go through a post-production process as well. So if there was a big hole in the back, that will be cleaned up and replaced with actual, tissue. Now, there's a conversation there to say, well, therefore, if you kind of retouch some of these images and taken out that hole and replaced it, are the images sort of then genuine, authentic, and stuff like that? But my answer to that is, the idea here is to try and convey the beauty of these insects and trying to help people appreciate them and their importance. Now, if you show somebody an insect specimen that looks sort of cronky and horrible and misshapen and stuff like that with big pinholes in it, then I think it's harder for the viewer to connect with that insect and get excited about it. And so you've got to look at the bigger picture about what you're trying to do. You're trying to educate them and try to promote insects, and I think you try and make them look as beautiful as possible, and you use all the tools that you can to make them.
We have another question from somebody watching. Katie Rose Kimball asks, what projects are you currently working on or excited about?
Well, I'm currently sort of I've moved away from this kind of high magnification photography. I've done 3 projects on it now, and each project takes 2 or 3 years to do. So the last project was called Extinct and Endangered, and that's been on display at the American Museum of Natural History now for 2 years and is on tour in Europe. And that'll probably be the last extreme macro photography project that I'll do. And I'm looking at the photography world at the moment and just seeing the technological development of photography. And I'm starting to think now whether I actually go further with it. So I'm actually going in the opposite direction and looking at old photographic processes from the 1850s, 1860s. So in the era like pre-film, and going back to that kind of more analog processes that are, we use in chemistry and plate cameras and stuff like that. So, and the idea, like I said before, I change type of photography, genre of photography quite regularly, and it's a way of exercising the brain. So I've pushed this kind of photography, what you're showing now. I think I've pushed that as far as I can. And so now I'm sort of taking a U-turn. I'm going in a different direction and learning a new process, and I'll probably do that for another 5, 6, 7 years. I don't know how, who knows. And then I'll get bored with that and I'll move on to something else. And it's just, yeah, I think it's good to keep on moving and changing direction to keep things fun.
We had just a comment by one of our staff members who said, "Ask him if we can take high res photos of our face, see what that reveals."
Yeah.
But interestingly, so the museum that I used to work at before I came here, there was a citizen science project all about face mites. So I suspect that you might reveal the fact that we have arthropods living on our faces, even as we speak.
Exactly. That's it. I think, I think on a day-to-day basis, and I'm guilty of this as well, I think we don't always appreciate our position in the world. When I say that, I go back to the last project I did, which is called Extinction and Danger, which is about insect decline. And I think we forget that we as humans are just a species cohabiting this planet. And when you're going about face mites and stuff like that, we're just a species, and they're cohabiting us. And I think we're not the master beings on this planet. We share in ecosystems. Things live off us. We live off other things, and I think we need to cooperate as much as we can with our neighbours, should we say?
It's the true life version of Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Christy, any questions that we haven't covered for you?
Yeah, I just want to know, do you have any closing thoughts, Levon? Is there a last thing that you want to make sure people, if you could stand at the door of the exhibit and say, there's one thing I want to make sure you take away when you see this exhibit, what would that be?
I think it's probably to maybe just look closer at stuff. And by that, I mean, have the same experience that I had with my boy when I looked through a microscope at that beetles back the first time. When I did that, these creatures were living in my backyard and they're there all this time, and it's taken me on this incredible journey. And I think sometimes, it's rather than looking at things at eye level, get down on your hands and knees and crawl through the dirt and see what's in there and understand, like I said before, that we are sharing an ecosystem with tiny creatures that we rely on for survival. And if people go to the Microsculpture exhibition and they are amazed by what they see, they think these creatures are beautiful, and hopefully they can understand them more. And like I said before, Dave Grimaldi at AM&H said, if you don't understand something, how can you care for it? Well, hopefully, if they go to Microsculpture, they'll understand a little bit more about the beauty of these tiny creatures, and hopefully they'll go home and pay a bit more attention, a bit more care, do their tiny little part, and sort of help their chances of survival. And also just marvel in them, enjoy them, enjoy the pictures for the photographic side of it. Enjoy how intricate these creatures are, how clever they are, and take it from that just face value. But I hope all your visitors enjoy it, and they take something away.
Oh, you're yeah.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. You got to have that happen at least once, right? I feel so lucky that we got to talk to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been such a pleasure.
No, God, thank you very much. And I hope to see you. I wish you all the best for the show, and I look forward to getting some feedback.
Thank you, Levon. I'll add my thanks to Christie's. It really has been a pleasure to chat with you and hear a little bit about your story and your work. The exhibit is fantastic. Again, the exhibit is here at our museum until September 15th. So for all of our community, please come and see it. It really is awe-inspiring. And I'm not just saying that as an entomologist. It's really a fantastic exhibition. I'd also like to thank the sponsors who have made this exhibit possible here at the museum. So Rio Tinto Kennecott, the Meldrum Foundation, sponsorship in memory of Jane L. Parker, and of course our county, Salt Lake County institutional support through the Zoo Arts and Parks program. All of these entities have combined to allow us to bring this exhibit and exhibits like this to our community, and it really makes a huge difference. So Levon, thank you for your time today. It's been fascinating. And we hope that you'll come and see us here in Salt Lake City, Utah. We'd love to host you here.
That'd be great.
Good luck with your future projects.